Today's talk is entitled Zen and the Art of RV Living, to be delivered by our good friend Kelly Teevan. Kelly has agreed to a question and answer session immediately following his talk. The service may go over about 10 or 15 minutes past 11. Now, Kelly went to Harvard during the Vietnam War and majored in Spanish literature. In March 1975, he took something called Earhart Seminar Training, or EST, turning 24 on one of the meeting days. There he learned a lot about responsibility and did his first meditations. He heard, "Be here now," which he is still working on. At the time, he was a long-haired hippie house painter living near San Francisco. The next year, he bought a 1959 VW bus. Then he spent a year living in France and working on sailing yachts. At the end of 1978, Kelly sailed from the Gibraltars to the West Indies on a 19-meter boat, and scarily, of the 6-person crew, he had the second most sailing knowledge. 2 years later, he went to business school in California. No reasonable career ensued. More so, he took interesting jobs at World Wildlife Fund in DC, at Whole Earth Catalog in Sausalito, and other nonprofits. On Wall Street, he brokered something called options on crude oil futures. He later traded wheat, corn, and soybeans for an investment company. He was an unemployed house husband dad for years while his wife taught English at a Catholic college in New Hampshire, where his 2 daughters grew up. After 7 years in an RV, he bought a house in Cambria 1 year ago. I present you Kelly Teevan.
Thank you, Art. Keeping the gloves on. Wow, there's the photo. Good morning. So my only brother, Jim, would have turned 80 today. My only sister, Penelope, would have turned 77 later this month. Each died of cancer at 57 and 67. So I dedicate this little journey today to them. That was Michigan, about 1955 was the other photo. I'm excited and grateful to be here. I hope I keep this in the right time frame, and you can throw things or something if I don't. So today I'll be taking you on a little trip with me about the last 7-year period of my life, since from 2017 to last year, and what I learned and how. The journey was partly spiritual, partly practical, and definitely a time out from my regularly scheduled life. It was not planned past the first couple of months. My companion and my teacher was my RV, the Honey. I had other teachers as well. My temptation is to talk a lot about the interesting stuff, life in an RV, full stop. What a tiny corner of the Mojave Desert is like, its feel, its people, its charms and challenges. But the creeping self-discovery that came to me, much harder to describe, is more the intended content of this talk. I came to find certain rituals and readings as a path or practice to become more aware, to still my mind, and to be a good listener. So for a good listener, you're going to be hearing me talk a lot today. For a title, I riffed on the book by Robert Pirsig, Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. It's a little bit of a marketing ploy, but there is, I have incorporated some Zen into my practice, and the opening reading by art was certainly by a wonderful Zen monk, Thich Nhat Hanh. But from the tools I use, this may sound more like a 12-step thing. My practice, in fact, is an evolving mixture of grabbing onto teachings and readings from whatever source. I'll be talking about following my own drummer. My hope is that you can learn something from it, discover one resource, or have one inspiration. It's a path perceived mostly looking back, and this look back today is just another part of the journey. I did have a certain amount of intent when I set out in 2017. In fact, it was this clipping from a 1990s UU New York church letter that guided me at the outset. It is, in fact, what Art read by Don Juan and about the path with heart. So what were the reasons for my trip, and why the heck was I free to bug out? I think I fell asleep at the wheel of living the life of a parent, spouse, homeowner, and townsperson in New Hampshire. I lost myself somewhere in there. But I had to wake up. Divorce loomed in 2010, a complete shock. By 2012, Ann had moved out. 2 years later, we were divorced. Becca, our younger, was still home, shuttling with a suitcase, and big sister Ella was at UC Berkeley. This wake-up started my seeking secure footing in the world. I started talk therapy. Then I found Al-Anon, the 12-step program for families of alcoholics, through my wife, whose parents were alcoholics and knew AA. I learned about depression, alcoholism, other isms, about finding help, and about working on oneself, not on the other person, though that seemed really necessary. By late 2015, I bought an old RV, the Honey, which will star in the next section. It took 2 years to fix up our house and sell it. I had been employed trading commodities and well paid, but that had ended a few years earlier, which coincided nicely with my father having congestive heart failure in California. So I was able to come here and help out. He had died after 6 months, leaving me both money and the job of sorting out his estate. My sister died soon thereafter, leaving me as the last family member standing. Once I sold the house in New Hampshire, with Becca already off to college in San Francisco, and my RV on a neighbor's lawn, it felt like time for a new chapter, and really, sometimes like a time for a new me. I did not have a long-run destination, but I did have a short-term one, the Bay Area, where I had grown up and where my kids now lived. I also had a percolating sense of seeking. A couple years earlier, I had written down that I could feel my spirit in special places. Access to the capital S spirit is there. I need to make the effort, time, space, openness to go there and be there, though it be strange. I also found in the margin of a book, next to the words, "Those who have chosen to travel the difficult path of spiritual growth," I wrote, "Can I possibly attempt this?" The seeking I toyed with fed the desire to open up, to say yes, and various readings reinforced that, making it seem doable. So I decided to go to the desert and read Carlos Castaneda and his books about Don Juan. Why? Well, why Castaneda? Well, he spoke to me for a few reasons. I had read 2 or 3 of his books in the 1970s when my own mind was opening up. It's when I did psychedelics and literally saw connections in our world I never otherwise saw. It's when I was exploring myself. Also, I had held on to this clipping about a path with heart for maybe 20 years, reading and rereading it. And finally, I was reading some self-help books at the time, and I viewed Castaneda's works, as much as I could remember them, as helpful, as part of the healing I needed at the time. And why the desert? 3 main reasons. First, it's where RVers go in winter, because it's passably warm. I'd been to Death Valley, but that was it for my desert chops at the time. Second, all the Castaneda books take place in the desert, so it made sense to go there to read them. And third, I got a Godsmack in New Hampshire that sent me to downtown Death Valley. I'll tell you about that one later if there's time. And now for the honey. The honey, I got to tell you, this RV, I didn't know anything about RVs. So it's a 1985 Class C motorhome, 22 feet long. It is a classic. Don't listen to others. It's built on a Chevy 30 van chassis. It's fitted out by Honey Industries in Elkhart, Indiana, where all RVs came from. It had 30,000 miles, it was 30 years old. Its best cruising speed is 53 miles an hour. And it weighed in at 6 tons. I bought this land yacht in Vermont for $5,000 in 2015, knowing the tires were toast and the AC did not work. The Honey had all the systems I never learned how to use when I was living and sailing on boats, and I wanted to learn them. That's my foot, just for perspective. There's this stove, propane-based stove, fridge, furnace, and water heater. The electrics are 12 volt and 110. The water system has drinking water, black water, gray water. I also wanted to learn something about the legendary engine, the Chevy 350 V8 that ran the thing. I was dismayed to learn that the Honey got only 8 miles a gallon downhill with a tailwind. But gas was cheaper then, and it was cheaper back east. I have a note here. I did spend $403 on gas in one day, just so you know. I learned the meaning of a shakedown cruise. In an RV, if you don't put it on the floor or lash it to something or stow it, it'll pretty soon crash to the floor. I developed quite a pre-flight checklist for interior and exterior every time I made another mistake. In order to avoid damaging something or killing or maiming people on the road. I have to say I had not been an RV guy. This was not my dream. I was a tent camper and backpacker, kind of a minimalist, but a good friend who himself had gone over to the other side infected me with the thrall of RV camping. I test drove a couple smaller vans, but this behemoth lured me in. I was kind of proud to be an RV owner, taking it for various fix-up. People would see me and hear that I was going to set out. One would say why he and his wife hadn't done so yet, and the hunting or fishing they would do when they could, and isn't that what I would be doing? I was a dream image for people I didn't even know. And for the record, the Honey never stranded me in over 30,000 miles. And I loved the solid feeling of 6 tons. On the road again, I would sing to myself every time I started out. So what did I give up and leave behind? Over the RV years, the first question I would get from people on a phone call is, where the hell are you? I left behind predictability of location, being grounded in a place, a bunch of things. I'd been in one community for 23 years. I had an identity as a townsperson, a father, a neighbor, a customer. And I could choose to let go of other identifiers, type of job, education, politics. I'd lost a bunch of things through the divorce, and this added to the list of the left behind. Washer, dryer, the need for a calendar. Not all bad. I had no subscriptions to anything, virtual or physical. Heck, I had a tape deck and a radio. So I could be freer. At age 66, I left behind seeing my regular friends. Without a house and yard to care for, it was easier to pay more attention to the spiritual side of my being. And I left a lot of stuff in storage, so I still had stuff, but I think it had me less. Heading to who knows where, I left behind my medical life. I'd been on Medicare for a year. I avoided HMOs, which are geography-based, and picked an anywhere plan. This started me on the path of being an exception, an outsider, a weirdo, a willful misfit of our modern society, and I think that fit me just about perfect. So what about the art of RV living, from my title? You're brave, said various people to me when we met. These were non-RV people. I didn't feel brave. I suspected they meant selling the house, packing up, and leaving for the unknown. My main worry in traveling was, where will I spend the night? In, say, Wyoming, if you get to the campground 1 minute after the last other person, there aren't any other options nearby, and that might take some bravery to figure that out. Just driving in a busy town with a big lug like this, you can't say, oh, there's a gas station, and get there. RV rear ends, because they're long, bottom out. And I did that at speed until I learned, which took once. I learned a lot of things. One aspect of the unfamiliar and scary, possibly scary, was good. Traveling on the edge of scary means I remember things really well. I made plenty of mistakes, and I'll also tell the worst later if there's time for that. So, I don't have the birthday candle here to lean this against, so I'm just going to show you. Okay, I love Tecopa. This map shows Tecopa west of Las Vegas, kind of in the middle of a lot of the Mojave Desert, basically. And then we're going to have a photo, an overview of, look where that thing's set. This is, my RV's down very close in the front here. It's an amazing setting. Tecopa, population maybe 200, has no stores or gas station. It had hot springs, motels, RV parks, campgrounds, 2 breweries, and 3 restaurants. And private homes and trailers, some of which were totally blown out, and one which was 2 stories and very strong. Magicians could grow vegetables and have green grass there, but humans not so much. My place, which is the very front stuff with the sort of reddish roofs, Tecopa Hot Springs Resort, had hot pools, a motel, RV spots, dry camping, and a music stage. I'd have to rate the facilities as decrepit, which was standard for a place blasted by triple-digit weather for months and winds that could blow pebbles. That's Tecopa Peak, named for a native chief. Winds that could blow pebbles. I think the Hot Springs Resort suited me down to the ground. What did I do? I was a rare person who walked everywhere. Converting your RV from driving to living is a pain in the, or converting it back to driving. For example, it's critical to have it level for various reasons. That takes a lot of work sometimes. And at 60 cents a mile, it wasn't worth driving the 35 miles each way to Parham, Nevada, to get groceries. So I had to shop ahead for weeks and sometimes ration food. When COVID came, it got trickier. So life was slow and within certain limits. How far could I walk and back before it got too hot on a given day? Water is gold in the desert. So at the start, I drank bad water for 7 weeks. Once clued in, I bought water at a kiosk when I could get a ride and poured it by the gallon into my storage tank. I did dishes outside with the arsenic-laced water. A lot of mining in the area. I showered in the bathhouse, which meant planning and maybe walking into a gale. And I always forgot something. Power, I had, the person on the far right there is watching. I had a 30 amp hookup to run the outlets, which meant I could plug in a heater because sometimes it froze. The new AC I put in because I stayed into late May when it gets really hot if you're living in a tin can. I lived in low light. I got used to darkness. I like that a lot now. And never once in 7 years did I use my onboard water heater. And I left the place in really hot months. There was no cell service. I could borrow the office phone to pay my monthly Visa bill. No phone certainly frustrated some in my life, but I had accepted the limits. Word of mouth still works for a lot of things, or leaving a note with a rock on top. And what were the people like? People often ask me. There were characters, misfits, they were from anywhere. We said they were running to something or from something. quite a few artsy folks. I think people were more honestly themselves there, but they could also be more anonymous if they wanted, because nobody knew you, where you came from, what your name was, in fact. A lot of people didn't have last names, you know. It was Jeff Hunchback, Jeff this, you know, you just had to identify them that way. It was politically mixed. It was a strong community because of the self-reliance of being so remote. The county seat is 100 miles away. So I picked the desert. The desert is a special place, and that is no news. And it's very different from what most of us are used to. I have some observations. For me, it's a good place to just be. By that, I mean to let go, to stop striving to be as opposed to do. To pay attention. Paying attention in the physical desert enhanced paying attention to my spirit. I think this is because there are so few distractions there. Very few roads, trees, structures, even people. One is closer to nature. I could feel the desert. Hearing and vision change in relationship to each other. There's a true silence. It can be deafening. The sunlight can be too bright. I think hearing becomes more important and eyesight less. I like this. Coyotes, ravens, roadrunners made sounds, but scorpions were quiet. Many people experience the desert only at 80 miles an hour. It's really better at 3 miles an hour. I learned to go slowly, to let time take time. Speaking of time, one cool aspect of the desert I call visible time. The mountain ranges are bare of trees and soils. One sees the layers of rock. One can see layers going back millions of years, right there in front of your eyes. And when one sees the stars at night, that light left home millions of years ago. It's kind of what maybe, it's not what God can see, but it's pretty good. Being alone was helpful too. There was no one to compromise with. I could decide and focus fostered stillness. The forces of nature, the intensity of it, encouraged me to see that I was not in charge. I was just a bit player, but in something vast. And finally, the desert offers mystery. Its extremes, its huge scope, its strangeness. And for me, mystery is a doorway into the spirit. So, what did I actually do? I was usually alone. Mostly I walked, I read, I sat, I looked and listened. Walking made me part of the world. To be alone in the wide open desert is freeing in a way, just me and all that reality. Maybe it was good to be a little bit scared. My alertness was similar to times when hiking in the High Sierra or scuba diving around sharks. I read a lot, fiction and spiritual works. I started with Carlos Castaneda and read 6 of his books. I explored on and on. We'll put up a list at the end of the talk, which and I'll share that with anyone if they like. I developed a morning ritual. I started with making coffee. Did I leave it here? Yes, here's in my little happy camper mug. And there really are sometimes, people have these in front of their rigs. And then reading from these daily readers of Alcoholics Anonymous and Al-Anon. I had acquired these in the divorce era, and they provided me a grounding for the day. And I sat under my open sleeping bag, leaning against some cushions on the sofa/bed, and I tried to keep distractions out, no cell service, that made that easy, and I had a wonderful view. And I usually spent 90 minutes doing readings, and I began to pray, which was new. I started with praying for one particular friend, Rebecca, but then I would append others, myself and my kids first, and I might name 50 people, just going through lists of people and particularly remembering people who were struggling or had a birthday or something like that. And Rebecca was the first person I met in Tacopa, and she had wire wrapped a rock, which I would touch often, and it would, a touchstone, it would bring me back to reality, the way maybe ringing this bowl and refocus one. I observed quietly. I'd be looking at huge mountain ranges down to little bitty things, maybe a spider web. I especially in the desert watched sunlight and shadow move. I was practicing for other times of the day. Can I remember to stop and be still and look and listen? I'm going to share briefly from these readers. There's one page per day. February 14, I'm picking here from the AA reader. I must keep a time apart with God every day. Gradually, I will be transformed mentally and spiritually. I pray that I may faithfully keep a quiet time apart with God. I pray that I may grow spiritually each day. In that one prayer are a few words I'd had trouble with 10 years ago. God, pray faithfully, spiritually. Little by little, I'm getting these words. The Al-Anon reader, courage to change, is more practical. Another day, confusion can be a gift from God. I will thank my higher power for whatever I experience today, even if I feel troubled or confused. I know that every experience can offer me a gift. All I have to do is be willing to look at my situation in the light of gratitude. I go slowly in the early morning. In one prayer, I use my 5 different senses. I try to touch peace, just it's for a moment. And I remember joy. I can have joy if I bring it. And I listen for my higher power. And I love, and I have hope. So, what about lessons? I set out to grow and heal. What did I learn? And I feel I'm always starting over on these. There it is. Number 1, turning it over. The 3rd step of the 12-step programs has been a key one for me, the key one. I will turn my will and my life over to the care of the God of my understanding. It means I am not in charge of how things turn out. I still have to do my part. I have to listen for direction. But the results aren't up to me. And if something goes differently than I was hoping, that might be just the perfect thing. Like in that reading about confusion. I cannot see around corners. I was thinking today that maybe Bobby Fischer and Boris Spassky could see around corners, but not me. Second, paying attention means being quiet, observing, let others do the talking. I'm not less present because I'm quiet. 2.5, related, I enjoy being around most groups of people far less than years ago. It takes a lot of effort to pay attention in such settings. All I have to give really is my attention, and it works better for me if there are fewer people. 3, our perception is limited. Some of the learnings I had on this, reality is more like what Peter Wohlleben describes in this book, The Hidden Life of Trees. Under the ground, the forest is all connected and really intelligent, and we can't see it, and we don't understand it. But that's true above ground, too. There's just a lot we don't see. Eckhart Tolle has tried to take the me out of everything that's out there. It corrupts your perception of reality. And then Don Juan, my buddy, says, the world is incomprehensible. We won't ever unravel its secrets. Thus, we must treat it as it is, a sheer mystery. 4, certain important words have more meaning now. You see them on the screen here. I pick 2, faith. I call that my ability to trust that the spiritual path I am on is the right one. And heart. This is where the journey started. Heart is that which most clearly perceives and then can feel for myself or for the other. I am on a path with heart. When I set out, I needed healing. I found it. I keep at it. I have a lot of questions, more than I had at the start, such as, do I have less fear and worry? Can I stop judging? Being attached to outcomes, wanting people to change? How do I know the right thing to do? One key question is, does all this spiritual work matter? And I found an answer which will be the closing reading. Final question, what is next for me? I hope you all will come and check out my new campsite at 1750 Dovedale Avenue, Cambria. And this is the works that I have, some of them that I've found very helpful for me over the past few years. Thank you. Yeah.
Okay, so the question is, what, you're spending a lot of time alone. I don't know if that was probably a new experience for you, or I assume you're coming from a life like me where you're constantly around technology and you're around people. And so how did you deal with the loneliness?
While traveling distances as opposed to staying in one place, so I just looked a lot. You know, when I drove, I had to be extremely aware when driving this vehicle, and figuring out, because I was going into places I didn't know where I was going, and maps of farm roads in Kansas trying to get to some park or something, heading cross country. So I think I just focused on a lot at the beginning. I did listen to music some, and a big surprise for me was that I made new friends. So once arriving somewhere, or people in campgrounds will talk, you know. I think they too, they have time, they want to share things, they saw things that day. So I got a lot more comfortable with it. I think partly age might be part of it. It's a good question, you know. But I am much more comfortable being alone now.
Good question. We have time for a couple more. If anyone would like, there, let me go back to this.
Hello? Does it work? Okay. First of all, is there a copy of the list of books that you liked? Yes, okay, I would really like one of those. I also really like Illusions by Richard. I think that's a fantastic book. It's really sad, but it's also really beautiful.
At one point, yeah, I'm sorry.
Oh, no.
At one orienting the talk totally on the book Illusions.
I think about it all the time, like since I read it like 6 years ago. It's really good. My mom actually met him. He yelled at her in a taxi cab because she thought he was Richard Brautigan, who wrote Trout Fishing in America, and not Richard Brautigan. But anyway, my question was, if it's not too personal, do you think that you would have been able to go and be so isolated and away from everything if you had still had everything that you had, in a sense? Yeah, pre-divorce, I guess. If you still had the family in the house.
Oh, I wouldn't have come up. I wouldn't.
Truly alone in every sense, too, though. I mean, also, I just can't imagine, leaving anything. And it's very Buddhist in that sense, to really truly leave everything. That would be a totally different thing.
Yeah, it's all just a practice, you know. It's just start new every day and try to remind myself to be a little bit present today, to listen a little better, something like that. And having no job, I had time to do this stuff, you know. That was kind of a gift.
We also travel sometimes, not in that respect. But we had an experience once where somebody said to us, "Do your kids worry about you?" Did you have contact with your kids, and did they worry about you?
Thank you, Sue. The most frequent people to start a phone call with, "Where are you, Dad?" Were my kids, I don't think they worried. I don't think it wasn't perfect at all for me to be away and unreachable that much. And I had along the way the desire to get someplace fixed so they would know where I am. And it took a long time for me to decide that that place was going to be Cambria. But one of them asked repeatedly to come stay here at Christmas. And so we did that a few years. So it was here. Yeah, we had contact. I drove to the Bay Area for my daughter's 25th birthday. I mean, I drove this thing and figured out where to park it, which was in Oakland. I got woken up by a cop the next morning.
Kelly, how did you find that town in the middle of the Mojave Desert?
Okay, that might be one of the, I didn't name any of the omens that but I have been listening to omens and some came along. This was, okay, a guy doing an appraiser, appraising my house I was selling, was dead silent going through the whole house, but then he came out of my office and he said, I got to talk to you. And he drew me a map of a campground in Death Valley. This is in New Hampshire, and saying, you've got to go to this event in a little over 6 months. Here's the day you sign up for the campground, and here's what it is. And it's called the Death Valley 49ers. It's a 1-week thing in November. And so, of course, I went. And it was only 3,000 miles away. And there I met another camper who was camping alone, and she didn't like driving Death Valley on her own, so it was nice to have someone with her, and she was familiar with Tecopa. So 2 months later, maybe I called her and said, I'm trying to figure out where to go, and she said, you could try Tecopa.